We are officially live here with Dr. Andrea Mata, who is an associate professor of psychology at the University of Finley. The reason we have her on today is to just discuss mental health during this crazy time. There are a number of people who are looking after their physical health. I think that's kind of a thing in this country. You go to the ER for a sniffle, but you can have some pretty traumatic things in your life that happen, and you will not go talk to anybody or get any sort of professional mental help around that. So the reason to discuss this today is just to talk about mental health during this pandemic, to talk about mental health as an athlete, living, coexisting with your family and understanding your children and all those different things. So I think maybe a good way to start this off is just to discuss sort of uncertainty, anxiety, fear, all of those things in general. And just to give people who are maybe even unfamiliar with what that means, what that feels like to them, just a sort of an elevator pitch of what maybe they would experience or expect during something like this.
Okay, so usually when we talk about anxiety has like three components associated with it. So there's like the cognitive component to it, meaning like your thoughts, where like, oh my God, I went out to the grocery store today. I didn't have a mask on. Am I going to contract COVID? And then am I going to infect all of my family members? And then like you essentially snowball yourself. It all just started like with one thought. So that's the cognitive piece. You usually experience it in regards to worry and anxious thoughts.
Okay.
Then there's like the physiological piece or the physiological component that people can experience, where that's more like your heart starts to race. You have kind of an uneasy feeling in your stomach. You sweat, you shake. All of those kind of things. You feel like you can't breathe. And then the third piece is the more of the avoidance piece. So when we are experiencing anxiety or fear or worry, we tend to try to stay away from the things that's going to lead us to be more anxious. So that's at the basic level, that's kind of what anxiety is, or the kind of the breakdown of the three different components to it. And people typically experience it in kind of mostly like cognitively or physiologically, and then behavioral kind of stems from that. You avoid because you have these anxious thoughts, or you avoid situations because they make your heart race.
Right.
And so, so here, so people tend to do one or the other or both. So people will experience anxiety in different ways. Some people are much more cognitively anxious versus more physiologically anxious. And so kind of the way to best combat which one you are depends on which one you are, if that makes sense.
Right. I think during today, like especially in today's time, we are in a very unprecedented time. I don't think really, if you would have asked anybody 3 months ago, did we expect anything like this? The answer probably would have been no. And I think that, there's a lot of things that people are facing right now. It could be complete financial stress. It could be loss of a job. It could be the fact that they're not able to travel, or people don't generally have things to look forward to these days. I think first and foremost, I want to address the question, if people are having those feelings around times like this where they're worried or they're stressed or they're uncertain, those are completely normal for somebody to experience during a time like this. Can you talk about that just a little bit, about how that's a normal process for us to go through, that we don't really have to be too worried about that?
Yeah, so like a lot of the time, so right now, all of our lives have just completely uprooted and have significantly changed in, a short amount of time. I know in Ohio, where I'm currently at, for at least probably 2 weeks, my husband and I would joke that like every day it seemed like there was a new restriction. And so we had to adapt our behavior. It was like, you can't do this. Now you can't do this. And so you're constantly having to adapt and you're having to change. And we as humans don't like change to begin with.
Right.
And so now you're just throwing massive, or people, outside of our control, they're trying to keep us safe, which is, I greatly appreciate. But at the same time, when we are constantly put into a situation where we have to change and we have to adapt, we're going to experience anxiety. We're going to experience, discomfort just because we don't know what the next thing is going to be.
Right. Now, if somebody is starting to feel some of those things or experience some of those things, and I know that each person is completely unique, so it's really difficult to give a general sort of counseling session to, the general public. But are there any things that you could recommend that somebody could do to help themselves if they're feeling anxious, if they're feeling fearful of maybe job loss or financial situations? What would you recommend in order for somebody to sort of address some of the feelings that they're having?
So, what the topic that I would probably kind of go into is what, in sports psychology, we talk about control. And so, an activity that I have people kind of, or have people do, is I have them take out a sheet of paper and I have them draw a rectangle, right? So, like a rectangle on their sheet of paper, and then they draw a circle inside of the rectangle. And then I instruct them that, okay, in the rectangle, but outside of the circle, I want you to write down everything that's outside of your control. Like everything that's going on in your life right now that's completely outside of your control that you have absolutely no control over. And so that would be COVID, that would be what other people are doing. That's, what governor and what our president restrictions, are being placed on us, whether or not your business goes out of, is struggling financially, or what your employer decides to do, the weather, the spread of the disease, whether or not someone, is able to come up with a vaccine or a cure, something along those lines. So sit down and for you personally, list out in that rectangle everything outside of your control. And then what I want you to do is inside of that circle, I then want you to put down what is inside of your control, what is within your control. And if you start to kind of put everything in that circle that's within your control, you're going to notice that it all boils down to two things. There's only two things that are absolutely within your control, and those are your attitudes and your actions. And so I usually tell people in times where they're feeling really anxious, especially when they feel like they have no control, well, they do still have control over their attitudes and their actions. And so what can they do right now in this hour, in this day, that's within their control, that's going to improve their quality of life?
I like that. Well, that's very cool. I mean, that's kind of talking about, if you're worrying about the future, you're upset about the past. You really can't change those, but you can work on the present
Mhm.
moment, right? So I like that. That's good advice. So my lovely wife, you know very well. She went through the psychology department with you, and she's told me that you've done a couple triathlons, maybe one or two. Is that true?
I've done one. I plan to do a second one, and then I got pregnant with Chloe.
Okay, okay. So you do have definitely some sports experience. And so a lot of the people listening today are either cyclists or athletes, um,
Mhm.
and they put a lot of time and a lot of focus and a lot of energy into training. And a big reason they do that is because they're going to race.
Right.
Today, we don't really have races to look forward to. I think what we've heard from a lot of people is number one, what are we doing from a training perspective, which we're addressing that in other places, but how can you stay motivated for something that you're not actually really able to do? And from a sports psychology perspective, do you have any information or any advice for people who want to definitely remain in the sport that don't necessarily have a specific goal, that they can stay motivated each day where they're getting up and they're saying, hey, I want to train and I need to focus on maybe not a race, but something that's going to keep me motivated for each day?
Yeah, so absolutely. So I think there's two different techniques that I think I would probably suggest. The first one would be reframing. So just because you don't have a race to compete in, that doesn't mean that you still can't compete day in, day out. So like say you wanted to complete a sprint triathlon in, you had a certain time limit. Well, you can, depending on where you live and whether or not you have somewhere where you can swim, Well, you can still kind of go out and one day decide that, hey, this is going to be my triathlon day. And you just kind of do it yourself, and you're competing against yourself. You're competing against, your time, whatever that
Mhm.
time is. And so it reframe it. So it's not necessarily a race, but it's still a race. You're still able to compete against yourself. It's not ideal, but again, it's completely outside of your control. But I think you could compete against yourself.
Hey, you'll place first too, right? You can get that podium. I like that. That
Right. And maybe you make yourself a medal,
you make
like
yourself a
maybe,
medal,
or
or
have,
maybe your
if
kids
you have
who,
kids or something like that, have your kids make you a
yeah,
medal, and then you can walk around and go to the store and get a t-shirt and make yourself a little, whatever your name is. So like yours would be like the Thornham Triathlon.
yeah.
Um, you can wear that around with your little, you're the medal that you've created for
No,
yourself. So try to adapt the experiences to kind of still experience it as close as you possibly can to those things.
I like
So
that.
that would be my first kind of suggestion. The other suggestion would be, um, one way to maintain motivation is engage in what's called goal mapping. And so lots of people are very familiar with setting goals, but far fewer people are familiar with what's called like goal mapping.
Hmm.
And so goal mapping, there's like, are you familiar with goal mapping, John?
I am. I love it. I follow it every single day of my life. I'm a huge fan.
But for the listeners who are not familiar with it, there's essentially three different levels of goals. There's outcome goals, there's performance goals, and then there's process goals. So your outcome goal, you kind of start there, and you want to write all of this down because research shows that you're 42% more likely to obtain your goals if simply by writing them down. If you just, instead of just putting them in your head. So the outcome goal, you kind of start on this sheet of paper over here and you write down whatever your outcome goal is. So it's kind of like a longer term goal and it's mostly outside of your control. So maybe you want to qualify for the Boston Marathon, or maybe you want to qualify for what's a big bike race.
Like the World Championships of Ironman in Kona or something like that. Yeah.
Right. And so something that, maybe, you kind of put it longer. Maybe it hasn't happened. It won't happen this year, but maybe it'll happen next year. And you can still be working towards that. So you put that as your outcome goal. Then you think about things, what's performance goals. So those are standard based goals. Usually like they're performance based, your personal best, your personal record kind of thing. And they're measurable, they're specific, they're time bound. So, like if you're competing in a triathlon, well, then there's three different, it's pretty easy. You probably have to have three different performance goals. One specifically for the swim piece, one specifically for the biking piece or the cycling piece, and then a third one for the run. And so you start, I'm going to run the 5K. If you're doing a sprint triathlon, I'm going to, my goal is to complete a 5K in, 19 minutes, something like that. And then what you do, then you go to the process goals. And the process goals are day in, day out, week kind of focus goals that you have complete control over. So these are things that you're going to set out every single day or every week that are going to then lead you to your performance goal.
Mhm.
So what are some things that you need to be focusing in on every day to get your 5K where you want it to be, or where you want your cycling goal to be? What are some things that you can be working on? So is it doing sprints, or is it kind of working out or lifting in a certain way or stretching, whatever that is? So then really focus in on those process goals, because those process goals are then going to lead to your performance goals, which then are going to lead to your outcome goals.
Understanding the concept of a process goal is the thing to me. It's like I was always very, I want to do this project. It's 2 years, and so I was always fighting for that actual thing to happen. And so I
Mm-hmm.
work every day, and I'm like, oh, I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet. And then I read a book probably 3 or 4 years ago, and I'm like, oh my gosh, why don't I
Yeah.
just each day that if
Yep.
it's a time oriented goal or I want to put 2 hours towards it, if it's if it's a mileage or a yard thing in the pool, whatever you're doing,
Mhm.
why doesn't each one of those that I complete have me feeling successful,
Right.
have the joy, have the pride that I've actually done those. When I
Mhm.
was able to think through that, I mean, everything you actually get there faster because each day you're feeling
Right.
success, you're feeling very motivated about it. So I'm a
Absolutely.
big fan of
You
that.
got to celebrate the little things
That's
because
exactly
the
right.
big things are too far. It's too long away, too far away. You
Yes,
need to celebrate the little things and give yourself a little like fist pump.
and I think today, like celebrating little things is good because a lot of little things today are who knows what's going to happen next.
Right.
Another thing I want to talk about was sort of if we get too far down the rabbit hole, I guess, with uncertainty and not knowing and too many bad
Mhm.
things happening, we can lead ourselves to depression, which is obviously not good.
Right.
And I wanted to talk sort of about the importance of physical activity
Mhm.
to actually help keep yourself out of depression or being too unmotivated. Can you talk about that and what that does to the body when you work out?
Yeah. So, one of the most empirically supported treatments for depression is what's called behavioral activation. And so, behavioral activation. So, one thing is that when we are depressed, we're not getting any kind of reinforcement. We're not getting any kind of positive vibes, any kind of joy. And so, what behavioral activation is thinking about activities that you can engage in that are going to make you feel happy, that are going to bring you joy, and then really focusing in on and kind of doing those process goals of okay, what am I going to do today that's going to bring me joy? So is it going downstairs and coming up with a new like workout plan, or actually going out and exercising. So behavioral activation is really helpful. So doing like little things that are going to boost your mood to keep you off of the depression. But then research also shows that just simply physical activity, it increases your endorphins, and that increase in endorphins is going to again elevate your mood, and then it's going to kind of keep depression at bay. But for those that are like I like they're already kind of they're we've already lost, like they already feel like they're lost, they're on the couch right now, they're just laying down, they are Netflix or Hulu or HBO, whatever it is. One of the things that I would encourage them to do is what's called opposite action. So you just do the complete opposite of what you are feeling right now. So if you want to stay on the couch, get your butt off the couch and go do something, anything. And that will, by you having that little success of getting yourself off the couch, you'll actually feel better because those endorphins will hit you. And then you'll feel less kind of, woe is me, I'm depressed, all my races are, canceled.
I like
And
that. That opposite action is very cool, and I'm happy that you brought up the concept of process goals in that because it would be really easy to go out and say, "Hey, I'm going to go out, I'm going to work out," and then you work out and you say, "Well, that wasn't what I thought," and I feel really, I'm not as fast as I was because I've been sitting on the couch watching Netflix for a week.
right.
So, yeah, you did get up and you did the physical part of it, but if you're not actually talking yourself through it mentally, saying, "Hey, okay, I'm probably not going to be as fast as I was last week, but I completed the goal. I'm seeing progress."
Mhm.
That makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, 'cause I can only imagine that right now people have a lot of negative self-talk. People have a lot of
Yeah,
negative self-talk to begin with, but like I can only imagine like right now the couch seems so much better, and so we kind of have to hit them with positive self-talk and be like, get off the couch.
yeah, that makes total sense. So another thing I think that's pretty unique right now, from a time for all of us, is that we are all home. I mean, I work from my house. My wife is here all day as well, and so that's kind of normal for us. We do travel a lot, so we're kind of confined to a space that feels confined because we're not actually able to move out of here. But I think a lot of people are now coexisting where they normally wouldn't. Kids would be at school. Uh,
Right.
People would be off at work. Maybe there's a babysitter. There's a whole number of different things. And so if you do come home and you're with your family, maybe it's a few hours a day. And if that's, from an extreme side, maybe that's 2 hours. Now we could be together for 16 hours of being awake, right? So can you talk about just coexisting with family? And I'm sure there's going to be disagreements. There's going to be a lot of happy times. There's going to be a lot of those things, but maybe some boundaries of with your family and ways to communicate that are going to try and prevent some of the escalation of maybe fights and arguments. And if you feel that they are coming on or they are happening, ways to um, maybe help get over those hurdles.
Mhm. So I think probably the biggest thing right now is just communication. So being able to communicate what your needs are and what your wants are, because those are two completely different things, and they come into play a lot with relationships, whether it's your romantic relationship or your kid like your parent-child relationship. And so you really have to kind of communicate what your wants and your needs are, and then do that in an effective way. And so, say like, if you've been playing with your kids, or you've been around your kids for a good part of the day, and you're just starting to feel kind of worn out,
Yeah.
maybe you look at your spouse and say, hey, can I get a few minutes? I just need to kind of go and rejuvenate. Maybe I need to go for a run, maybe I need to go for a ride, or walk, wherever it may be, where you can, kind of rejuvenate and kind of get your needs met.
Yep.
So having those, being willing to talk to your significant other and working that out. Another way is just, I think, what a lot of parents are struggling with right now, especially because now they are the principal, the teacher, and the parent.
Yep.
um, I think you just have to kind of give yourself a pass and give yourself some grace right now, simply because there's a lot of chaos going on, and you're expected to do lots of things that you're not typically used to doing. And so, if it's been a really kind of crappy day, either figure out a way to do a course correct. So maybe have a dance party or something where people's moods are elevated. Or maybe it's just really like, hey, you know what? We're going to watch a movie for the next for however long a movie is, and have family movie, day, so that you can kind of get, unwind a little bit with the kids. In regards to romantic relationships and even just relationships in general, but kids probably won't be able to do this. It's called I feel statements. So like, I feel this way when you did this. In the future, could you do this instead?
Yep.
So it's a way to kind of, again, get your objectives met.
Okay. Cool. And if there are any sort of fights or disagreements, especially in confined quarters, I know a lot of times people say, "Hey, I'm going to go out for a bit. I'll come back. I'll cool off, and I'll come back." But if we can't do that, um, thoughts about controlling things like that, and maybe when you come back and you do meet, things like apologies, or what are the best things you think around certain things like that?
Yeah, so I don't think the vast majority of people listening to this probably live in a tiny house that's like 400 square feet. So there's probably some, kind of square footage. So maybe you go to a different room and you take some time, because I always say, like, cooler heads prevail.
Yep.
And so we're having a discussion when one person is heated or another person is heated, what's called like emotional mind,
Yep.
doesn't serve the couple well at all. And so going off and doing something by yourself, that's then going to activate what's called logical mind, and then coming back and really having a conversation and this discussion when you're both in logical mind, I think would serve the romantic relationship much better.
Okay. Cool. One thing that I've read about a little bit, and I've seen to some extent with some people that I've been talking with, is the concept that everybody right now seems to be going through sort of some of their potential worst. And so let me give an example of that. There may be a child who's 8, 12, something like that. And maybe this, for them, not being able to go to school and see their friends, or not being able to, play soccer or whatever that is, may be the most horrible thing that they've ever had to experience in their life. Now, if a parent who has just lost a job is trying to figure out how they're going to keep home, if they were to compare that to what their child is going through, it may feel to them like, well, that's no big deal. Get over
Right.
it. But I think it's important to understand that we're all sort of going through this in our own way. And as somebody described it as, comparative suffering, where it's like, well, we're comparing ours is worse than yours. And so you have to, buck up because, well, I'm in a worse situation than you. Can you talk about just how it's important to understand that each person is going through their own unique and situation, and that's just as important as yours, especially in a family situation?
Absolutely. So I think it's a matter of giving people validation. So if my, not that I have it, but like I know with the students that I've been working with, because NCAA has canceled all spring championships, like all of our athletes, they don't have a competition. So like we have lots of, senior baseball players, senior softball players, senior lacrosse players that their career has ended.
Yeah.
And so to them, that's like the worst thing. Like you said, it's the worst thing ever. But then there's people out there that, are struggling to have food on the table. And so I think it's a matter of we just have to provide people that validation and not make people feel like they're invalidated.
Yeah.
Their feelings are invalidated. And so I always say, like, people's perceptions are their reality. And so, however people perceive the world to be, that's what is going on with them right now. And that's their reality. And they should be allowed to have that. And you should acknowledge it. And maybe it's not completely accurate, but in this moment in time, like, do we really want to be, saying, like, hey, mine is better than yours?
Yeah.
Because it's just not going to lead to really good relationships in general. And so
Yeah.
I think kind of acknowledging like what you're going through is what you're going through, what that person is going through is what that person is going through, and that you both are struggling and focusing in on the struggle
Yeah.
compared to what's causing the struggle.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. As far as resources, anybody that may, be looking to try and help themselves through a time like this, can you recommend maybe just an idea of, maybe let's think of it as a book perspective? I mean, there's a ton of different books on mental health out there. Some of them I'm sure are very valuable. Some of them probably aren't worth the paper they're written on. Can you give some guidelines as, hey, if you are looking for this, you may basically want to look for something in this category, to help people out if they want to look for something like that?
Yeah, so like I would say that if your marriage is struggling right now, so if your not marriage, but if your romantic relationship is struggling right now, the book that I recently read and is, I think, are probably top notch is called The All or Nothing Marriage, by Eli Finkel. Or you can pretty much just search anything, like go and Google search like Eli Finkel, and he has a ton of stuff. Another good romantic relationship person that I probably should have mentioned before I mentioned Finkel is Gottman. So John Gottman, he's probably the leading expert on just romantic relationships in general. And so just Google Gottman, and he has an abundance of books.
I love it.
Um, yep, Gottman. There we go, Gottman.
Yep.
I think for or for just mental health in general, one of the websites that I typically send my research or my students to, just to find the most empirically supported treatments for different kind of mental issues, is if you Google search APA Division 12. So that's the American Psychological Association. And then they have 54 different divisions, and that's the clinical psych division. You can actually go on their website, and in the top bar, you can choose like psychological disorders, and you can just choose depression or anxiety. And then you can scroll down, and there's actually self-help. There's like a self-help piece,
Yeah.
and so, or like a part to it, so you can actually look for books specifically for those, that whatever, thing that you're suffering with. So
Yeah,
depression, anxiety, that kind of stuff.
that's awesome. And if somebody is looking for a good counselor, maybe for them, for their family, or whatever that would be, can you give a resource of where they could find somebody that could potentially help them out? That would be a
Yeah.
credible
So
resource.
So the best one that I know of is Psychology Today. So you just go to psychologytoday.com and they have a search engine for mental health providers in your area, or in your state that could do telepsychology or telehealth, whatever the term is that they're using. And so you can go in and you can search like their bios in there, and they'll tell you what insurances they accept, kind of what their theoretical orientation is, and what their expertise is.
Yeah.
So I think psychologytoday.com is probably the best source for
Resource.
that.
And if I'm not mistaken, you're at the University of Finley, but you also have your own private practice, right? And it's
Mhm.
around kids, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, kids and teenagers.
Cool. And are you focusing specifically on anxiety disorders and certain things like that? What is your sort of area of expertise? And if people want to learn more, how can they learn more about that?
So I am an expert in the what's called externalizing behavior problems. So like antisocial, aggressive behaviors. So like oppositional defiant disorder, conduct disorder, but also anxiety disorders, sleep disorders. So you can, if you wanted to kind of know more, kind of touch base with me, you could probably just email me at admin. So ADMI, or sorry, ADMIN
Mhm.
at Bright, BRIGHT, spot, SPOT, Ohio.com.
Awesome. Excellent. Well, listen, we really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for being here. This was a piece in this whole thing that I definitely want to have in here because I don't want to let it go undiscussed. But thank you for your time. And if anyone has questions, I'm sure they'll get to us or get to you. But I hope you're staying safe through all this, and I'm sure we'll
Yep.
talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, John.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.